welcome to the Footy Mailbag. We are back for the 2025 preseason, helping you get your starting team and season strategies in order. My name is Damo, and here with me, as usual, is Clarky.
Hey, it's me. I'm back. They let me back. Damo lets me back every week.
We have a debut this week. Super excited to introduce Peter from Nerds for Life SuperCoach and also Insight Fantasy Sports. Thanks for coming onto the podcast to talk about the ruck line.
Thanks. No, thanks for having me, both of you. I've been pretty pumped to talk about the ruck line since you messaged me a couple months ago that you were going to do it, because it's the one position that I keep changing every day. I just can't. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to change it again after this whole episode. I just know I am.
Last week we did the forwards episode, and there were a few things we spoke about that made me make some changes to my own side. So I completely understand that. So yeah, this episode is all about the ruck line. But before we get there, let's just quickly run off some SuperCoach relevant injury news. So Nick Newman is out for the season with a torn patella tendon. That opens the door for the likes of Doherty to potentially move back into his old role, Adam Sard, and people have been looking at Ollie Hollins in a role change. Sean Darcy has resumed full training at Fremantle, but will head to Qatar for assessment for a biomechanist. I assume this is for training habits, precautionary preventative measures, and all that, but they're not really telling us much apart from the fact that he's going to Qatar to have his knee looked at. So all eyes on that, and hopefully everything is all good. Levi Ashcroft is yet to join full training at Brisbane following shoulder surgery, but the Lions are adamant he will be ready to start the season, and Gideon Coleman is yet to be integrated into main training at Brisbane as well. Adam Treloar also not in full training at the Western Bulldogs with an ongoing calf issue, and Gawn and Petrarca are close to resuming full training at Melbourne, according to Fox Footy reporters.
Good roundup, Damo.
So let's start with the ruck line. We're going to go top to bottom, so most expensive down, just like last week. And that puts us with Max Gawn on the pedestal, the man I just spoke about, 668K, 21 games last year for an average of 124.1, 16 scores of 100 plus, 10 of those 120 plus. He went at a massive 1.17 points per minute. I think he's gone a little bit under the radar, but maybe 668K is too much to pay for the big man.
I mean,
so like, are you first?
Peter and I both just had the same brain working where we just went, and I think we can both say that we're going to be on a similar track. So Peter, I'll let you go first.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll start off with, I don't know what it is. He's 34, I think, or 33. And I know that's he's one of the few players that in the competition that are still older than me, so I can call him an aging player. I'm not going to be able to say that for very long. But the thing is, how long can he keep that top spot for? The reality is, and also, I don't think Melbourne's going to be that good. I really don't. I just don't think they're going to have that massive bounce back season that they think they're going to have. I could see them finishing 10th maximum, which is okay. They'll have some wins, but I just don't see them having that big season. And I just don't think we're going to be seeing the Max Gawn of old. Yeah, he's going to have some massive games. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think he's a top 2 ruckman. And with the flex position, I don't even think he could be a top 3 ruckman. I think there's going to be other players that are going to be pushing the peak of their careers that we're going to be talking about very soon.
And listeners, I'd like you to thank Peter for joining us today. He will just have to be shipping him off after that one. But what can I say about my captain? Max Gawn is the number 1 ruckman, and I've said this many times where the age is the fact. We were talking about his age last year, and Melbourne had a terrible season. And even in games where Melbourne were playing terribly, he was still turning up. So I think I'm looking at it slightly different to Peter, where I understand the risks involved with it. And I spoke about this with Swizz from SuperCoach Insider, where I did a Melbourne preview recently with him. And we kind of came to the conclusion that if you're going to buy Max Gawn this year, aren't you better off buying him at the start of the season if you're worried about his age and his endurance? Buying him at the start of the season, riding him, and then jumping off when the next best ruckman presents themselves, instead of going for any of the other options that we're going to talk about today. he's a known quantity. His scoring isn't solely based on his ruck work as well. That's what we have to remember, is that Max Gawn's position is actually a little bit more hybrid and involves a lot more running both ways, in terms of he is at times an intercepting defender. At times he is a tall forward in marking positions. And he's the captain of the club who, let's be honest, is an impact player, which is all big green ticks for me, SuperCoach wise. He was my first pick with absolutely no qualms about it. And the ruck line is so difficult if you get that first pick wrong, because if you gamble on somebody who is cheaper, it is very difficult in the middle of a season to find the money to get the next best guy, or to even get the best guy that's going to give you some kind of comfort. So are we not better off riding him for the first couple rounds? He doesn't play round 0. So that means we get rounds 1, 2, and possibly 3 before we see any significant price change. And if he still looks like he's got it, then you may as well ride him until either his 34-year-old body breaks down, or he's going to have a season very similar to the one that he did even last year, where it's easier for me to count the times he didn't turn up than the times that he did. So I think that's going to be my approach with Max Gawn, but I think both sides are valid. It's all about how your team is going to structure itself.
He's a really, really safe floor type option. And when you're paying this high price for this type of premium option, you really want that safety of a guy that's not going to go below 90 at a minimum too much. And I mean, 668k is a lot to pay. And I know there's people out there who have put restrictions on how much they're going to pay on a certain line for certain players. But Max Gawn has shown in the past, despite his age, that he can play a full season averaging 120 plus, and he is going to be a dominant force for Melbourne. And just to speak to your point, Peter, on the fact that Melbourne probably aren't going to do very well this season by your projections.
Yeah, careful, Damo.
He is the guy that seems to be the dominant force that stands up when it's getting tough out there for them. So I think at 668k, you're pretty much paying for what you're going to get. It's just a matter of how long it takes him to slow down, if he's going to slow down at all.
That makes sense. But I just want to raise one more thing. Hypothetically, you nail it. You picked Max Gawn. He's gone massive up until his bye. He's done really well. And then he starts pumping out some average scores. And you said that you're happy to jump off him if something else presents better. But at that point, you're going to be nervous about pulling that trigger, because what happens if he's only had a couple of bad games? Then those couple of bad games might go to a month. And now he's dumped a bunch of cash. You've got a couple of other injuries. You can't really jump off him in time because he's not a priority. Now he's continuing to pump out those average scores, and you can make the decision, but he's just lost you a bunch of money, and you can't jump on that next guy because that next guy is now too expensive. That's my concern, is that, yeah, you're right. Maybe Gawn does really good to start you off in the year, but the reality is when you're expecting to jump off a primo, most of the time you don't have the luxury to do it unless you've nailed all your other positions and you don't have any injury issues. You tend to just have to ride that primo out for the rest of the year. Like with me and Tim English, for example, I just had so much other crap that was just burning in my team. I just had to leave him for all season. I just had to leave the average scores. And then also, if I did have the opportunity to trade him out, I'd be like, wait, is this the game that he pumps out 140? So that's just my 2 cents on the matter. He could still be the number one ruckman. He could still be the top 3 ruck, and you've done really well. But I just feel like the risks outweigh the reward this year.
I completely agree with you, but you can literally apply that to any player.
Oh, I agree.
You could say the same thing about Marcus Bontempelli. You could say the same thing about Nick Dacos. You could say the same thing about Harry Sheasel. And it's like, okay, well, that's when it's important for individual coaches, and we're not the people to tell you exactly how to run your team and the rules and the parameters that you want to accept. If you go, hey, Max Gawn has had 3 games in a row where he's scored 70, 95, and 84. Okay, this is the time for me to jump, right? Like you have to have those rules in your own head and whatever's going to suit you. And as you said, sometimes you don't have the luxury to do that. But if he spends half a season going at even his lowest average since 2017 was his last time he didn't average over 100, and that was a 91 for the 2017 season. His lowest season since then was 104 in 2023. But that's still, we have seen coaches in top ranks, and we'll reference our good friend Lekdog, who had Riley O'Brien as a ruck for a good portion of the season, if not most of the season, I believe, Damo. And he was someone who was also just fine. So I don't know. It's tough, right? You got to have those rules and those parameters in your head, but you're buying him because of that first half of the season, even if it drops off, because any player can drop off at any point. But it's a perfectly valid fear to have, right? And if you don't want to pay top dollar for that, then by God, we're going to move on to this next guy who is probably a really good up and coming option.
Yeah, let's move on to Tristan Xerri. He is 645k, played 23 games last year for an average of 119.9, 19 scores of 100 plus, with 9 of those 120 plus, 1.13 points per minute. He's a tackling machine in a growing North Melbourne side, and I just don't see him taking a backwards step. 645k might be his maximum price. We might be paying top dollar for the guy, but I think we're paying for consistency and a week-to-week captain, vice-captain option.
It's funny with Xerri, isn't it? He has all the upside of a growing North Melbourne team. And once again, he's a ruckman who, like Max Gawn, we notice that he doesn't score his points in the traditional hit out to advantage number. Like, that's a big part of it, but it's not the only thing he does that's very, very lucrative to point scoring. So, and I'll ask both of you, do we think that his role in North Melbourne is enough to warrant that safe floor, or do we think there's still a little bit of growing that needs to happen within the team where he might not be able to replicate it?
I can't see him sharing a ruck load, to be honest, very much. Yeah, I mean, there'll be a chop out, but it won't be much. There's really no one coming through the ranks that's going to push him out of that team or even force their way into the team where he's, being a dual ruck in a dual ruck situation. Coleman Jones is not going to be stepping up, and I think he's injured. Though Xerri did lose a one-on-one contest in a match simulation against Whitlock, make of that what you will. But I still think Xerri he's the man. At the moment, he just had a career year, but he's in his mid-20s. I think that for the next 5 years, we're going to be talking about Tristan Xerri a lot when it comes to SuperCoach. And I'm more willing to pay that price purely because I think this is a guy that is entering the peak of his career. This is going to be that 5-6 year period where North Melbourne are improving as a team, and to take that extra step, Tristan Xerri is going to have to play a big part of that.
We talk about ruckman being that extra midfielder, and we've got the likes of Brodie Grundy, Tom de Koning, all those sorts of guys that kind of act as that extra midfielder once the ball is bounced. And even though Tristan Xerri is not your typical prototype extra midfielder type ruckman, he does get his hands on the ball quite a lot, and he kind of goes into defensive mode straight away. His tackle numbers for a ruckman are kind of out of this world.
I think my biggest concern about Tristan Xerri is a regression in North Melbourne, though. It's not his ability, right? So is his performance and scoring going to be very closely linked to North Melbourne's on-field performance, and how much does that improve? Or if there is, no movement or regression, I can talk myself out of him in an easy way, talking about how bad the side he plays for is, right? So I think, is that something that's a legitimate concern, even though his tackle numbers are off the board and we know he's the only guy?
I think if their midfield is the one position that I think North Melbourne should improve it. Simpkin, sole captaincy this year, is flying at training. He didn't have a very good preseason last year, which meant that he played forward a lot more. Now he's looking like he's going to play midfield more. Wardlaw's got another preseason under his belt. Sheasel, they've just brought in Luke Parker. LDU's apparently doing well at training. their midfield, in theory, should start to win more of their own footy. So does that mean that Tristan Cherry's tackle numbers reduce because they're winning the ball a bit more? Now, I'm not saying that their defense and forward line is going to necessarily, allow them to win as many games. But at a minimum, I just think that midfield is actually pretty decent. So I just think around the ball, at least, they should be okay.
Yeah, if his tackle numbers go down, his hit outs to advantage should go up by that midfield growing in confidence. So one should offset the other in theory. And if North Melbourne do regress, I mean, they won 3 games last season. If they regress any further, then there's going to be some alarm bells ringing in that club. So I think with North Melbourne improving, or, should be improving in 2025, I think Tristan Sherry will improve with that and also the midfield unit around him. And a strong ruckman, a strong midfield, that's going to be, that's going to be scary for opposition teams, but it's also going to produce SuperCoach points for us as well.
Yeah, I think it's pretty easy to set him in, and he's earned that second spot. So who else have we got, Damo?
Next up is Rowan Marshall. He is 603k, 23 games last season for 112 average, 16 games of 100 plus, 11 of those 120 plus, 1.06 points per minute. I'm also going to mention St Kilda signed Harry Boyd out of the Sandville. He is a 99k rookie, averaged a massive 159 in 20 Sandville games last season as well. And reports are Rowan Marshall is going to be up forward a lot more, and it's Harry Boyd's midfield now.
Which is wild, because looking back at 2024, Rowan Marshall finished the year quite strongly SuperCoach-wise, which means that surely he was doing something right, but St Kilda are bad? Is that the consensus? Is St Kilda a bad team, guys?
I think the consensus is St Kilda needed to try something different. The team was kind of growing cobwebs because they were too stagnant in what they were doing. So they had to try something else. So they've brought in a couple of midfielders. They've drafted really well. They've signed this Harry Boyd guy, who is probably going to be one of the best rookies of the season if projections and hype matches whatever he can do. So we could see a totally different St Kilda side, a far more exciting St Kilda side, but that will probably mean that Rowan Marshall doesn't end the season as a top echelon ruckman.
The problem is we've seen this role from Rowan Marshall before. He was a premium ruck. I remember, I think it was back 2018. This is just a random year. I'm pretty sure it was like 2018, 2019. I'm pretty sure he was a gun ruckman. Then Paddy Ryder comes to the club, and he's in no man's land as a ruckman. He's playing more forward. He's not really primo status anymore. And that lasted 2-3 years while Paddy Ryder was there. Soon as Paddy Ryder retires, Rowan Marshall's back to being the number one main ruckman. And those couple of years, he was fantastic for us. So I owned him both in 23 and 24, and he had 2 amazing seasons. But now that Harry Boyd has come to the club, they've also got this young kid named Dodson, who they really rate quite highly. Is there I honestly think, and Rowan Marshall's been training in the match sims more forward. I think that means that he's we should be fading him for a starter. Maybe we look, if he is playing forward more, maybe we look at him as a forward option as the season progresses, because I'm not opposed to that. He could cover your line probably better than I would rate Rowan Marshall playing forward ruck over Luke Jackson hypothetically playing forward ruck. I would prefer that, but at the moment we just got to see what Boyd does. If Boyd plays, Harry Boyd plays round 1, then Marshall's he can't be the option. He shouldn't be the option we're going with. But something I do want to point out, if Boyd is not playing round 1, Marshall avoids all the early buys. He has the best mid-season buy. And also, he plays Richmond twice and Richmond early as well. So he's got like some captainable games in the early parts of the season too. So if Boyd's not playing, Marshall's a pretty good pick.
Yeah, I think I can't deal with the uncertainty at the moment, right? Like we need to see what happens round 1, and I don't think Rowan Marshall should be in our early sides. I agree with you.
He hasn't got anywhere near my side, and I think no Harry Boyd being named for round 1. I think that's too late for me to change my team. I think the ruck line is the one line I want to have settled as quickly as possible before I start moving around any other pieces. So I think I'm hoping that Harry Boyd is named in round 1 because there'll be players out there, SuperCoach players out there that people flip around to bring in Rowan Marshall, but then there is always the risk of Harry Boyd, Alex Dodson, even Max Heath has been waiting in the wings for a while, coming in at any point and disrupting that Rowan Marshall role.
I think maybe we should be rowing our boat onto the next player, Damo.
Tim English is 581k, 23 games last season, 107.1 average, 14 scores of 100 plus, 8 of those 120 plus, went at 1.01 points per minute. He was frustrating to own last season, and I don't know. I feel like he's going to be one of those guys that not a lot of people will trust heading into this season after last year, but he could be one of those guys that surprises and heads back to the top of the tree with a full preseason.
Yeah, Peter, I'm gonna lean heavily on you this one because Damo pretty much summed up my feelings about Tim English, which is I don't know, maybe, I guess.
I'm actually swaying towards a very different opinion.
Yes, good content, baby.
I want him in my team. I just can't fit him right now. It's frustrating me that I can't fit him. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. I've got a couple of friends online who go to Bulldogs trainings, and at this training sessions, preseason last year, he was training with the rehab group most of the preseason. He was not with the main group at this point in time of the year, and it took a long time before he joined the main group. He has been with the main group since before Christmas and since the Christmas break. He has been doing all the ruck training. He has played all the match sims. He has been involved. So that means he should have a natural fitness base that's a little bit better than what it was last year. Last year, he just wasn't, it wasn't that he wasn't just winning contests. He wasn't getting to as many contests as he did previously. So I think that hurt his season a little bit. He actually wasn't that bad. The thing that is I spent 700k on it, right? That's what annoys me. But if I spent 581k on him, he actually didn't have that bad of a year, if you think about it. And he's the kind of guy that's now put together 2, 3, 4, maybe SuperCoach relevant seasons in a row. So he's kind of that proven performer, and his ceiling is so good. His ceiling is huge. I think, look, this is going back a few years, but when he went 200 plus against Essendon, right? And I was at the game and I was there with my Essendon mate and I had the captaincy on him and I was playing him in SuperCoach that week. I'm never going to get that out of my head. And maybe that's bringing some emotion into it, but I just feel like this could be a bounce back season. And it's not even that much of a bounce back because his year wasn't too bad. It's just that it wasn't number one ruckman good. But it was still, he's still the 5th most expensive ruckman for a reason.
We're talking about a guy that averaged 128 in 2023, which was 12 points better than the next guy, who was Rowan Marshall, who we just spoke about. So he has it in him to be one of those out of this world averaging ruckman, but he's obviously last season just didn't have the fitness base because of an interrupted preseason. And I think I say this every time we mention Tim English, but in his draft year or just before his draft year was coming up, he was actually a big-bodied mid and then had a massive growth spurt and then was suddenly thrust into the ruck role. So him being able to get around the ground and rack up the football is part of his natural game. Just being a ruckman is kind of the new part to it that he's still, or that he was still getting used to back when he was drafted. So now that he's got both of those parts nailed down, maybe 581k is actually an okay price to pick him for. But if you are picking English and Sherry, you're going to have no ruckman for the round 12 bye, which means if you're going to, which means you might have to choose between one or the other depending on how your team is looking. But the Sherry English combo does look pretty good if you can get around that round 12 bye.
If only we had a flex position.
Tune in next week when we discuss the flex position. Next player is Brodie Grundy, 574k, 26 games, obviously, because they played the finals, 106.2 average in SuperCoach, 12 scores, 100 plus, 8 of those 120 plus, 1.1 points per minute. I'm struggling to talk myself into any ruckman that has the early buys.
Yeah, there's that, and I think with Brodie Grundy as well, he's in a bit of a no man's land of value, where he's not quite an upper echelon ruckman who you're like, okay, cool, this guy's got a safe floor and a good ceiling, and he's kind of awkwardly priced when there's a few guys a bit further down who probably have the ability to be on the rise from what we've seen. He's also a bit underwhelming to kind of watch. He doesn't excite me, guys. I don't know. Is that what I'm trying to say? Like, it's not necessarily anything that he's doing wrong. It's just that it doesn't light a fire in me. I'm doing little fire fingers with my hands for all you audio listeners.
We're waiting for Brodie Grundy to return to those 115, 120 averaging heights, but he actually hasn't been there for 3 or 4 years now. So maybe this is the Brodie Grundy now, and he's just another ruckman that, you know, has the history, that has the ability to have that massive ceiling, because his maximum score last year was 158, but we're still waiting for that consistent high scoring that he had all the way back when he was at Collingwood, and we just haven't seen it in the last few years. And maybe this is Brodie Grundy now. Maybe he is just another guy on the page.
He's a good player. He's a good AFL player. Yeah. Sydney, fantastic recruiting to get him. Like, that they knew what they needed, but he's not SuperCoach relevant anymore. We're talking about Tim English and saying that we don't have confidence that he can get back into his 2023 form, which was a year ago. And now, but we're trying to convince ourselves, hypothetically, to get Brodie Grundy, who's like 10k cheaper and was the top ruckman in 2018. Like, the time that he peaked was significantly further back than what English is. For example, I'd rather pay the extra 10k. And also, I don't like Sydney.
Yeah, I think, look, I know that we're not specifically draft focused, but I'd say Brodie Grundy has a lot more relevance there. It's just like a solid ruckman that you can probably get a little bit further into the draft, right? And you can sort of pick him up after all the big ones are gone and people sort of go, oh, yeah, I'll focus on another line. You can probably pick Brodie Grundy up in a few of those late early rounds kind of area.
Next guy on the list is Darcy Cameron at Collingwood, 566k, 23 games last season for 105.1 average, 12 scores of 100 plus, 8 of those 120 plus, went at 1.03 points per minute, averaged 124.2 in his last 5 games of last season, which ranks him as the fourth ranked ruckman over that period. I was looking at his numbers earlier today just so I had this information, and Mason Cox doesn't actually affect his scoring that much.
No.
So we have to look. Cox came back into the team at I can't remember the game, but he went, so since round 18, right? I just want to read out these numbers. Since round 18, right, Darcy Cameron went 131, 132, 121, 99, 165, 144, and 92. Okay, that's it since round 18. Now, if I find Mason Cox, I'm pretty sure most of those games, if not all of them, he played. So I'm just going to Coxie now. He played from round 20 onwards. Okay, so from round 20 onwards, he played. So that goes to show that out of those 7 games I just mentioned that were pretty big, he played in 5 of them. And then at the moment, I didn't even see Cox as part of that best 22 or 23. That Collingwood look like they may have passed him in terms of their side. I've been watching a lot of videos throughout the preseason of some match simulations, And Darcy Cameron is ragdolling it. It's almost as if Mason Cox is a brand new 18-year-old and, some guy in his 30s is just pushing him around. It's that he is that much better at the moment, Darcy Cameron. It's scary. And the end of the season form was just so good. I'm going to be honest, he's actually been in and out of my team. So I am not opposed to starting like a Tim English and Darcy Cameron as your ruck line. It would be a massive POD ruck line, but the positives are just there. And I actually think the floor is going to be fine. Like you were saying with Riley O'Brien last year, is he really going to average below 105? Probably not. He's probably going to be a 110 guy at worst case. I could live with that.
Yeah, I don't think anyone should have ever expected Cox to be anything more than to just come in and give some relief to Darcy Cameron in the odd occasion. So there's absolutely no reason why he's not the number one guy there. I think it's just a matter of you kind of picking him as a safer second option. He's probably R2 material, right? Is that? I think that's fair to say. Like, I don't think I see him being like a top 5, but definitely like solidifying himself in the top 10 of rucks. Isn't that great, guys? We got through the whole segment saying Mason Cox without one single dick joke.
Until now.
Yeah, I'm feeling a bit meek about it,
Let's move on.
I got to practice.
Anyway, the next guy is Lloyd Meek. 557k, 21 games last season, 104.5 average, 14 games of 100 plus, 4 of those 120 plus, 1.02 points per minute. This is a guy that I used my final trade on. I traded him into my team. I wanted something different. I wanted a point of difference to try and thrust me up the rankings, and then injuries came along and it didn't do a thing. But I was pretty happy with the trade in because I was getting a score of at least 105-ish most weeks. And like he was fun to own in that Hawthorn side with all those guys, with bringing that personality into that game plan. He was fun to own because they wanted the ball and he wanted to, and he was attending all the ruck contests and moving forward, and he was fun to own. 557k. He is someone who's on my radar, and I've seen him in a few sides already.
Yeah, I think Lloyd Meek is kind of an easy sell because people were worried about the Ned Reeves factor initially, and then Lloyd Meek started performing, right? So between round 16 and round 24, he only had 2 scores under that ton, and that's just good vibes, right? Like I'm a big fan of Lloyd Meek, not only because I have a vested interest because I have him in the keeper league, so I've actually been watching him for a little while now, especially very closely last year. But also, I think Hawthorn are kind of on the rise. Like, we're seeing their system starting to work. We're seeing the talent that they've got going through, and he's a part of that. I think he represents someone, as we were talking about, in this price range with high ceiling, low floor potential. So he has all the same pitfalls of a team that is growing, though, where it could kind of go either way, and some of his performance may be tied directly to Hawthorn's ability. And we know in that, that run that I was talking about, that was when Hawthorn were really pushing for finals, right? So can they bring that kind of magic back this year? I think it's certainly possible, and I don't hate it. And he's actually currently my R2.
If you look at Meek's 2024 compared to Ned Reeves' last 25 games, Meek is higher on average in almost every category. So I don't think there is the issue of Ned Reeves coming for that number 1 ruck role. However, with Mitch Lewis unavailable, Carl Shadia dealing with his back issue, Ned Reeves has been playing as a key forward in their match simulation setups. And there is the worry that Reeves does come in and take a little bit of that ruck pie just because he's in the lineup.
Reeves has actually been training really well. From all reports, he's bigger, he's fitter, and he's actually been winning some ruck contests too against Meek. So I've seen some really positive signs from him. There's a chance that he does, like you said, force his way into the team as a forward and then a bit of a chop out. Like, I really like Meek. I really do. I brought him into my draft league from the free agency after one game. I don't know how I managed to score him, and I did, and he was fantastic all season for me. But his best game was from last year was 145 against Bailey Williams at West Coast. Okay, that's his ceiling, right? 145 is his ceiling, which is really good. It's not cherry English ceiling or Gorn, for example. Like those guys' ceiling games, 200 or maybe not cherry, but English and Gorn definitely, for example. And then even DeConning, 175 last year, I think he scored. Sean Darcy scored a 194. Like, I just don't see those ceiling games coming out of Meek. And then you've got to also factor in that he's got an early bye, which is not too bad because only Essendon have that bye as well. But it's just, I wouldn't have him anywhere near R2, definitely. R1, no. Like, I don't want to even know who your R2 is if he's your R1. But that's, yeah, I don't mind it. I don't mind it. If you see upside in it, I don't mind this pick.
All right. Tom DeConning is our next guy up. 547k, 18 games last season, 99.2 average, 8 scores of 100 plus, 6 scores 120 plus, 1.04 points per minute. There's always the threat of Pitternet.
Did you make that rhyme on purpose?
Once I knew it was going to work, yeah, I did.
You seem quite. I could sense the pleased in your voice, and you deserve that, Damo. It's really good.
Yeah, it was good.
Peter, you mentioned the 176 before, right? That's against Geelong. Tom DeConning's downfall from 2024 was the fact that he actually didn't play a lot of games in the back half of the year because reasonably significant injury. Is that going to be a concern for owners coming into 2025, do you think?
I don't think so. I think Carlton didn't want to risk him as well. They didn't want to rush him back. He was injured. I suppose it happens. I don't think that's the main issue. He's played more games than he hasn't. So he doesn't really have an injury history. We're not talking about, Adam Chera, for example, or Sam Walsh. Like those two guys, like they've got an injury history, right? So DeConning just had an injury problem at the end of the season. That's fine. His ceiling was pretty good, and when he was the sole ruckman, he was great. I'm more concerned about if Carlton go with a sole ruck and hypothetically Curnow goes down. Do they decide to then throw DeConning back forward and bring Pitnet into the team? Because that could just happen at any time. So for me, Curnow and Mackay actually have injury problems. They have an injury history. So I'm not convinced that Pitnet stays out of the side forever. So you might get a month of good footy, but then you might get a month of of 60s, right? That's the thing that's bothering me about this pick still. I haven't been able to convince myself to go to Conning.
Solo ruck, he is really good. And if we were told tomorrow that he was going to be solo ruck for the entire season, I reckon he would be in 80% of teams if that was going to be the case. But it's not just, and as you say, it's not just Pitney coming in to help him. It's the fact that Harry Mackay, Charlie Curnow both miss games fairly regularly. Charlie Curnow had a full season a few years back, but they do miss games, which does bring Pitney into the frame, which just means that you know that DeConning's either going to spend time forward or there's going to be some sort of timeshare in that ruck position, and it's just difficult to trust. So it's not just Pitney coming in to be in the ruck, it is also other factors around the team. And Carlton love a preseason injury. Well, I don't think they love a preseason injury, but they're usually good for one most preseasons. And we've already seen Nick Newman go down. It's just a matter of if another one happens, how much that changes their structure again. So yeah, 547k, I would pick him in a heartbeat if he was a solo ruck. But until we get that confirmation, and I don't think we ever will, he's a hard player to pick.
I'm not convinced that Pitner is as much of a threat to his scoring as we think. looking at it as well, Pitnet is definitely not their first choice to even be in the team. So for me, I think they clearly know who their better ruck option is. There's no really ifs or ands about it. So I guess if the injury concern of Carlton as a whole is there, then that's maybe a reason. That is maybe a good reason to stay away from him. But he's genuinely a guy who was able to consistently perform and even performed okay with Petnet in the team. But I think you can see a point in the trend of scoring where they kind of realized that they got rid of Petnet because Tom de Koning was doing enough for them. So why would you not stick with that's your best option? Because it's much easier to replace a forward with somebody else, realistically, right? Like, it's much easier to do that than to ruin your ruck setup when you've got one of the, if all fit, one of the better midfields of the AFL at the moment, even just with Sam Walsh and Patrick Cripps and Chera alone. It's baffling to me. I don't think it's as much of a risk as people want, but I think it's a good narrative to tell yourself the reasons why he is risky.
That's fair.
Next player on the list is Sean Darcy, 529k, 10 games last season, 104.9 average, 6 scores of 100 plus, 2 of those 120 plus, 1.1 points per minute. This is a guy who came into his exit meeting and was told that he had to lose over 10 kilos before he was even going to see the training track this season. And he has responded by dropping 14 kilos. He is coming back looking slim, fit, and all that. And he's joined full training, as I said at the beginning, but they are sending him to Qatar just to make sure that everything is all good, have a biomechanist look at his running technique, all that sort of thing. So the club clearly wants him to return to full strength and play a full season. Does the fact that the club is being so cautious with him actually give you confidence that he could actually get a full season at some point?
See, the day or 2 days before he flew off to Qatar, or the news of him flying off to Qatar, there was a match simulation which he didn't take part in, but he did take part in drills at training, ruck drills, and won every single one of them. Just destroyed everyone else in that.
And I just want to add, when he was in those drills, there was no strapping on any part of him.
No. And then he was doing sprinting. I know that some people said that he still looks slow, but it's his version of sprinting. He's a big guy. And I know that he does rely on his weight to push other players around. But he's lost 14 kilos in a couple of months. I'm going to be honest, that wasn't weight that was giving him a bonus. That was probably weight that was dragging him down. It means that he might have less pressure on his knees. It might mean that he has less pressure on his hamstrings. It might mean that he has less pressure on his calves. It might actually be better for him when he is going in those ruck contests. There's less pressure on when he's falling back down from the contest, from a jump or something. I actually think this is a good sign. I read the article from Fremantle about him going to Qatar. It all seemed planned. They kept saying, yeah, he's moving along nicely. Everything's going along as planned. We just feel like he's good to go, and we're sending him there because he's ticking all the boxes. Like you said, I just think that this was all planned, and people are freaking out. But was it Elliot Yeo last year that went to Qatar? And how good of a season did he have? So I think this is a good thing. I don't think this is a bad thing at all. He's in my team. He's currently in my team. He's been in my team since Team Picker, and unless he's not playing round one, I'm starting him.
Fair enough. No notes from me.
Clarky has nothing to add. All right.
What is there to say? Look, here's the thing, listeners. I'm going to say this, and this isn't to be controversial, and this isn't to be devil's avocado. Genuinely, that's all great. I think Sean Darcy is a fantastic ruckman who's just had a pretty rough run of it injury-wise. I always think back to Luke Jackson being quote-unquote poached by Fremantle with the guise of, I don't know, I think at the time it was like, oh yeah, Luke Jackson's going to go and he's going to start to learn to be a better ruckman and stuff like that. And he's still just behind another guy who's better. SuperCoach wise, I don't know. I'm not that excited yet about him, right? Like, I think that there's guys higher up on the list that I'd rather be wrong about than to get Sean Darcy and be right. Does that make sense? That's just me personally. It's not a critique of Sean Darcy. It's not that I don't think he can do it. It's just that it's easier for me to be wrong about a guy and go down than it is to be wrong about a guy and have to go up.
I will say this. If Sean Darcy doesn't work out, it's about 60k up to the next guy that we have all kind of conceded that we are happy to have. So if he doesn't work out, there's going to be a bit of a team shuffle for those who are starting him if it doesn't work out. So I completely understand what you're saying, Clarky, and I just think 529k, it's better to start him and hope that he does well and then use one trade to get him out than have then he starts on a tear, you have to trade him in, and then he gets injured and you trade him out. So it's the injury prone argument of it's better to start the injury prone guys, so only have to use one trade to get rid of them, than trade them in and then have to trade them out later. So there's two sides of the coin in this argument, and every opinion so far has come from a pretty fair place.
I think this is why it's also important to potentially look at using your flex position to be a ruckman if you're going as Sean Darcy. And the reason for that is hypothetically Sean Darcy goes down. It doesn't work or whatever. And you've got that ruckman there in flex. You can move that ruckman into your R2 that Sean Darcy might be sitting in, or maybe Sean Darcy is your flex. If Sean Darcy is your flex, or you've got Sean Darcy in R2 and then your flex is a ruckman and then you swap them, you now have a pool of anybody to bring into that flex position. Doesn't have to be a ruckman anymore. Could be a defender, could be a midfielder, could be a forward, could be a rookie that's on his bubble that's about to explode and make you a crap load of cash. So you're not actually losing. You're now pinching someone that's right at the peak of making you more money. And now you've got 400k in the bank too for your next trade. So I still see, yes, there's definitely a risk, but it's how you play that risk to minimize the damage. So for me, because I'm starting Sean Darcy at this point, I have to have 3 ruckmen on the field in order to minimize that risk. I just haven't picked the other 2 yet.
Yeah, as you were talking about that full kayfabe breaking here, I was just fixing my team. Yeah, no, I can just have Max Gawn and Sean Darcy and everybody wins. So my team's a lot better. I rescind all my arguments. I've actually solved the problem, listeners. But it's a good thing to keep in mind. I think we've raised some good points that people should be thinking about team structure. Flex position is a really great option for you to have a look at a guy, and we'll talk about that more next week.
We're running out of time, so let's quickly run off the next 5 names. Kieran Briggs, Riley O'Brien, Jordan Sweet, Sam Draper, Toby Conway. They're all options.
They are all certainly players, Damo.
They are all certainly players, yes. Toby Conway, if he gets the number 1 ruck role at Geelong, how long does he hold on to it? 343k. Awkward price. There's not really a lot around him if it doesn't work out, so I probably wouldn't go there until we hear anything else. Sam Draper's in a contract year, but Todd Goldstein also exists, and they've got Nick Bryan, who probably should be their number 1 ruck anyway. Jordan Sweet, 478k.
So shit, Draper. Jesus. Drive by.
Jordan Sweet, 478k. He is probably the Port Adelaide number 1 ruckman, but Ivan Soldo is still at the club after not being traded last off season. Three guys that people aren't really talking about, but probably going to be, scoring well enough at some points throughout the season that people will at least look at them at, different stages.
I just want to ask you, okay? Tristan Xerri had an amazing season last year, okay? What do you reckon he averaged in 2023?
Oh, it would have been in the 70s. Right?
I know what he averaged in 2023.
I don't, because even if I had it on my computer, I couldn't read it from here because my eyesight is that bad. But I believe it was somewhere in the high 60s or 70s, if I remember correctly.
So Tristan Cherry averaged 72 in 2023. Okay? Not that great. Started the season priced at 407K. So a little bit above Sweet. A little bit below Sweet, right? Sweet actually averaged 88 last year, which is why he's got a little bit of a higher price tag. If he's the number one ruckman, Port Adelaide have an insane midfield. Like, just by him winning any matter of ruck contest, he doesn't even have to be the best ruckman on the day. He's just got to win some. Those midfielders should be able to scoop it up. Like, their Brownlow medalist is probably the fourth, maybe fifth best midfielder in that team. And that's just crazy to think about.
Isn't it so funny when a team teams have like two super competent ruckmen, but it's clear that they can't pick between them. So it's like, look, and like, this isn't to say, like, I'm not saying like one's better. Like, Sweet is definitely on paper the better ruckman than Soldo, I think, in my opinion. But they're both like perfectly cromulent football players, and Port have just yet to pull the trigger on one. So I agree with you. I don't hate Jordan Sweet as like a stash kind of deal for like maybe a draft, or maybe if your team is like super insane, you're like, you know what, I'm going to hedge some bets here. But like you're kind of gambling on Ken sort of pulling the trigger and going, no, okay, 100%, you're the guy, no contest.
It is hard because Soldo is quite established as well.
Does he still have the sweet mustache?
Yes. Yeah.
Then yeah, he still rates in my book.
That is fair.
He hasn't said a slur and he's got a sweet mustache, so he's doing pretty well in his AFL career.
Yeah, just quickly, Kieran Briggs, a lot of people started him off the back of the end of 2023. Didn't quite get there, but I think 2024 is probably closer to his kind of play style and scoring style, so probably not an option. Riley O'Brien, 502K. You're paying for a guy that's probably good for about 95 every single week. And Lek Dog, friend of the program, he had him for a lot of last season and just built his team around him and ended up finishing quite high in the rankings. So not an awful ruckman to start, just not a, super, just not a super trendy option.
I have two quick points I want to make. One, friend of the program, for some reason using the term program to describe our show, like, filled me with like a very momentary hit of joy, and I don't know why, but great use of that word. Thank you for that, Damo. And number two, Kieran Briggs is, in my opinion, one of the last ruckmen in the AFL who plays that, like, relies statistically and SuperCoach wise, relies solely on his hitouts to advantage as his main bulk of scoring. Like, I haven't quite seen him do a lot of stuff that sort of gives him scoring options outside of that. So if that changes in the future and he becomes a bit more hybrid, I think he has the ability, and he's shown he has the ability, but he's so reliant on everything going his way that I agree, that's exactly the reason why you probably shouldn't be looking at him to bounce back.
Kieran Briggs helped me win a Cash League grand final once in draft. But then the following year, he also crushed my hopes of winning the same grand final. So I don't know. I don't know where he sits.
Right down the middle.
He's a great draft option, though. I do think he's a great draft option, because if you can nail your earlier picks for other lines and then go, yeah, I know that I'm going to get Kieran Briggs with my 6th pick or 5th pick, I don't mind that. I actually don't mind that, but not for Classic.
Would you take him in draft over Jordan Sweet?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
I don't think there's anyone knocking down the door for, Bruce is not playing. I don't think anyone's knocking down the door for Kieran Briggs' position.
I just wanted to find out where you feel personally about him, and obviously he hasn't burnt you enough yet.
Not yet. I just think, like, the chances of Soldo coming into the team and making the Sweet pick bad is greater than anyone coming in for Briggs. Like, Briggs
I'm very interested, because we are talking about rucks, and Damo, I know you do want to move on. Braden Pruce, so far, just about every year for like the last 5 years, has been horrifically cursed with an injury right before a season started, where he's been, quote unquote, tracking well in preseason in his recovery. So I'm waiting to see what kind of is it who did ironic? What kind of ironic sort of injury he obtains this year?
Do I have to break the news to you guys that Braden Bruce was delisted?
Oh,
I was just
there you
checking
go.
that,
Cursed.
and we have made a mistake.
Cursed. That's fine. Even better.
It's even better.
Even better. You know what? The level of fact checking that we do for this show is limited because we are all people. Who's the next?
I feel like that's
reference.
my bad on that one.
No, that's fine. For reference, the next available ruckman is Lachlan Keefe, who ? Oh, Nicholas Madden. He's certainly a player that exists.
He was the number one owned ruckman in like 2023, if you remember.
102k ruck forward was my ruckman a lot of the season.
We salute you, Nick.
My vice captain did okay.
Pretty
That's
sure
right, wasn't he?
For most games, he was great. I loved it.
Yeah,
We salute you.
Excellent player. The last guy that we're going to talk about is Matt Flynn at West Coast, 261k.
Oh yeah.
He played 3 games last season for an average of 67. But if he gets the number 1 ruck role, worst case scenario, he's averaging 80 and making you a decent amount of cash.
He's 260k. That's the perfect price point to stick him in R3. Or I probably wouldn't waste the flex spot on him, given the momentary insight into both Peter and I's approach to the strategy for flex previously said. But I guess he's a cash cow, right?
I think we are too rookie rich this season to have a 261k player sitting on the bench. I think if you're selecting him, he is either R2 or flex, and you're cashing out when he gets to 450k or whatever he ends up getting to, or you're picking him to keep him for most of the year. That's kind of where I sit with him, but I'm yet to be convinced that he can play out a full season. And at 261k, if he goes down with an ankle injury, a knee injury, a hamstring injury, whatever it might be, where are you going from there?
You just got to get like a good month of football from him. Like a really good month of football from
Here's the problem, though. I don't think you're going to get a good month because his first 4 opponents actually are pretty tough. So you've got Jared Wirtz, who's actually hard to score against as a ruckman. He's a decent ruckman himself, right? He's just probably going to beat Matt Flynn in the ruck because Flynn relies on his taps. He's very much like a skinnier version of Kieran Briggs. Then you got Brisbane, and Oscar McInerney's probably not going to be fit and ready to go by that point. He's still in the rehab group. The injury that he had means that he might still be unavailable for the early parts of the season. So maybe he has a good game in round 2. But then he's got Luke Jackson. He's got Sean Darcy and Luke Jackson, right? So that's it's usually pretty hard to line up against. And then he's got Kieran Briggs, who is, remember, the guy that GWS picked ahead of him. Then you've got Tom DeConning. Then you've got Sam Draper, sure. Then you've got Lloyd Meek and Max Gawn and Toby Nankervis. And then Rowan Marshall.
I love that you're keeping going down this. I'm like, when's he going to stop? When's he going to say that is it Toby Conway in round 12? Is that his next
That's
good
the next
opponent?
one that I think that he can genuinely beat.
Because then after that, it's Sherry DeConnick and then Darcy Cameron.
Again, and that's the thing. And now I've just we've named half the rucks, and I'm like, he's not better than any of them. Unfortunately, he's just not. And then, so
this is the thing.
He's scoring.
The thing is,
I don't see any spike games there. I see 2 spike games, which means you're holding him to his bye. Maybe he makes you 100k.
It's a slow burn. He's a slow burn for sure.
Yeah.
If you went with it as a cash cow, you are definitely like, you need him to play every week for 2 months. Because even looking at like Bailey Williams is mediocre at best, like has a ceiling of 104 last year was his highest scoring game against St Kilda. Wow, really? Against St Kilda? Okay. I don't know, guys. I think you're right, Damo. It is a bit too much money to waste on an R3, but at the same time, cash is king. As much as I hate saying that because of the boomer connotations, but in SuperCoach, cash is king. So if you're flipping Matt Flynn after, say, 6 weeks, even for, let's say optimistically, he makes 100K in 6 weeks, is that worth the squeeze? What's that magic number to make that worth it compared to either a 0 or a non-existent rookie ruck who, maybe Tom Campbell maybe has been training a little bit in the Melbourne squad. We spoke about old mate from St Kilda, whose name escapes me.
Harry Boyd.
Harry
Boyd, that's it. I've been wrong about Braden Pruce. I didn't want to presume. So, I don't know. We know that the mantle is his for the taking. It's just a matter of whether he is taped together enough.
There is someone that I think potentially, depending on a teammate's injury and how long he's projected to return, could be better. And I think we've all forgotten he's a premiership player by default. And we've forgotten he's actually cheaper than Matt Flynn and is proven to be roughly same sort of level of scorer when he plays. I know that's not someone that you didn't want to bring up too much into, but Darcy Ford.
Yeah, 190K, 3 games last year, averaged 56.3 in the grand final, scored a 68. He's an option, and by all reports, Oscar McInerney won't be back until about round 5 or 6.
So you've got 5 or 6 games from
Four games, maybe 5, and then maybe a few with them chopping each other out while he gets back to match fitness.
And are we expecting much better from Matt Flynn? Saving 70K.
There's only one way to decide this, and that's for me to pull up a picture of Matt Flynn and Darcy Fort side by side and tell you who has better vibes. Oh, it's Darcy Fort by country mile. Okay, yeah, I think we solved it. I think we can say we solved that one. Great call, mate.
I'm just going to say he's in my team at the moment.
I love that. He looks so happy. Listeners, if you have a second, just pull up your little pocket machine and just Google Darcy Ford and look at his AFL, like his Brisbane profile picture. He looks like the happiest boy. And I would be too if I was him, but immaculate vibes. And also hasn't said a slur, passes the test.
All right. That is the end of this ruck episode of the Footy Mailbag. Thanks for joining us, Peter. It was a good discussion.
Thanks for having me, guys. It was a lot of fun.
Where can people find you?
They can, honestly, if the social media exists, I'm on it. I'm on Twitter a lot, or now X, Facebook, Instagram. So nerds, the number before, and then life, SC. The SC stands for SuperCoach. Just find me there. I've also got a TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, all of them.
And Clarky, thanks again.
Is it weird to have an episode with no questions? Do we have no questions? Listeners, what are you doing to us? Surely you had questions. No, you know what? We answered them all because we're so clever.
There was a couple of questions, but we answered them in our discussions. So
yeah.
Hopefully,
DM Damo directly.
So more your question about using the flex position for a third ruck. I believe we answered it. So,
or you can listen next week as well. Come back. We'll service you again. Yeah, sorry, David. Thanks for having me. I'm a co-host. I don't know why I'm thanking you for having me here. I'm actually invited with or without your permission. But
I can't get rid of you.
Me. Yeah, you can also find me over at the Falcon. A footy podcast. We're at Falcon Footy Pod on all the social medias that we have. I think we have a Blue Sky as well now, which we're slowly sort of more active on because it's not a hellfire that screams at me that the world is on fire every time I open it. You can also find all things Footy Mailbag at thefootymailbag.net. It has our podcast feeds. It has some merch on it. But most importantly of all, it has a question form so that you can engage with us whether or not you have a social media account. You're not required to be part of the big machine that gives you bad brain. You can just send us a question through the website. Damo's also been putting up some articles there. Oh, full transparency. Damo's been putting up some great articles there, and I've not contributed crap because I've been raising a child, which has also been fun. And you know what? To be fair, my wife is doing a lot of that work because she's much more clever and competent than I am. But I'm really enjoying it. But yeah, go check out our written content there as well.
And before we go, guys, just want to shout out Azajul, who has announced that he is retiring from fantasy sport, I should say, after 20 years. He has played everything from FPL, fantasy NHL, NFL, Dream Team, SuperCoach Racing, BBL. You know, there's been a fantasy format of that sport, he has probably played it, but he is no longer going to be part of the fantasy community. Obviously, a good friend of ours was part of Jock Reynolds. He was a massive stat machine. What he could do with an Excel sheet was really incredible. He did a whole team picker with pictures and everything that, you know, amazed everyone and was being handed out by a whole bunch of people. And you know, the amount of messages we got asking if other communities could hand it out to their listeners was insane. So I know Azajul is a friend of mine and a friend of ours, Clarky, and we'll be able to talk to him, you know, outside of this. But just thanks for everything that you've done for the community, Azza, and hopefully in retirement. I'm going to call it retirement, actually, because I think you'll be back eventually. I think you just need a break. I think you'll be back. You'll be back.
It was a sabbatical. We're just taking a sabbatical.
He's on long service leave.
Yeah, and it cannot be understated just how much of a genuine positive force as is and remains to be, both in our lives, Damo, personally, but also even in the fantasy communities. And that's the kind of thing that our communities need to thrive, is positivity and goodwill to each other. And he was somebody who embodied that, and I always respected him for it.
And if you don't know him by name, I guarantee you've probably at least interacted with one of his spreadsheets at one point.
100%.
Yeah. Next week, we take a look at the flex position with the Falcon Footy podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again soon.
Bye.